This lecture is intended for RCBC students for general biology, but all others are welcome to listen. We are picking up our discussion on virology by moving on to influenza. Influenza, like coronavirus and HIV, is made up of a genome of RNA. It is an enveloped virus, and on that envelope in particular are two proteins. One is hemagglutinin and the other is neuraminidase. So when you hear H1N1, a strain of H1N1, we're talking about a particular configuration of hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. When those structures change enough and they shift, we then give them different numbers. So you might hear H3N5 or some other numbers after the two letter designations. The pandemic flu, the Spanish influenza of 1918, we discussed earlier what an epidemic versus a pandemic is. This pandemic killed between 50 million and 100 million people worldwide. It so dramatically changed life expectancy because it killed the young, healthy people, like in their 20s. Most influenzas seem to be most harmful to the elderly and the very young because their immune systems are not where they need to be to fight off the influenza. If you take a look at this graph here, the number of years from 1900 to 2000 versus the life expectancy, and you can see that approximately 1918, 1917 even, the life expectancy was 55. And within, after the 1918 pandemic, the life expectancy went down below 40. So it had a dramatic impact because such a young group of people were dying. There's a lot of research done and speculation as to why this was so deadly. And you may hear something called a cytokine storm. Cytokines are a part of your immune system. And we believe that since the immune system of these individuals was so strong, their cytokines sort of overreacted, and that's what led to the deaths. It was an overactive immune system. Now let's look at the flu that we get every year. Influenza does kill 37,000 people a year in the United States. And as I mentioned, it's typically the very young and the very old. Why is it that we have a new flu that comes around every season? This has to do not with the reason that HIV changes, but with something called genome reassortment. This RNA genome, there are 8 different segments, and they encode different proteins, but when 2 different viruses infect the same organism, those 8 segments can mix themselves up. So let's take a look at where this may happen. And often this originates in Asia, although we believe that the pandemic Spanish flu originated in the United States. But where there is a practice, an agricultural practice, which has humans, ducks, and pigs in very close proximity, we can use the pig, unfortunately, the virus can use the pig as the mixing vessel. And so let's take a look at a human virus here and a bird virus here. You can see, just for simplicity's sake, these green proteins on the human virus versus the blue on the bird just indicates that these are 2 different strains of influenza. The 8 segments inside, we're also going to color code them so you can get a sense that they are different. But if this pig is infected with both of these viruses. The new viruses that come about are a mix of some of the human and some of the bird virus or segments, and the proteins on the surface are going to be different. So even if the human was immune to this version of influenza, they may not be immune to this version, because remember, your immune system sees and reacts to proteins on the outside, and these proteins look different than the proteins on this virus here. Here's another depiction to show you again that these two cells have to these two viruses must infect one cell. And when they dump all of their segments inside, and the segments begin to pull together so that new viruses can bud off, they don't necessarily rally up all of the red or all of the yellow. It's rather random, and it's a reassortment, which changes the proteins on the coat of the new virus versus what you see on the old one. In our PowerPoint presentation, you can click on the two links here. These are Howard Hughes Medical Institute videos, animations that show you how that works. I want to leave you with one thing about the pandemic of 1918. We call that the Spanish flu or Spanish influenza. And I mentioned before that it probably originated in the United States. But why do we call it the Spanish flu? The reason is that this was happening during World War I. And most of the countries that were involved in the war did not want to be publicizing in their newspapers that their soldiers, their healthy young soldiers, were dying of this influenza. And the country that did publish it was Spain. Spain was not involved in World War I, so it became known as Spanish influenza, although had nothing to do with it. I hope this helped you to understand virology a bit better. I'd like you to think about the life cycles of HIV, coronavirus, influenza, and how they're different, how they're the same, and how we might approach treating each of these. Thank you very much.